Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. Last year I made a few videos on French martial handguns used in the 20th century, not thinking I'd be able to obtain an example of the pistol I present today, the automatic pistol 9mm model 1950, or more commonly referred to as the Mac 1950, even though a third of these pistols would be produced at Moss instead of Mac. Although there are nearly 342,000 of these pistols produced, they're fairly rare in the United States as 1, many of these sidearms are still in French service, and 2, even if they do become surplus, U.S. laws are likely to prevent importation. This means that the pistols that have made it over here were from either an ad ran in American Rifleman magazine in June 1961, or they're Vietnam War bringbacks. Although most are from the former, I suspect mine is the latter for reasons I'll get to a little later. When it came to small arms in the French military, France found itself in a familiar position after the Second World War as they did the First. Many different calibers of rifles and pistols that became a logistical nightmare. I covered the development of the 1935 model pistols in a previous video, link in the card above, which is meant to consolidate handgun calibers in the 1930s and to officially replace the antiquated model 1892 and other service pistols such as the Ruby. Germany invaded in 1940, and the 1935A pistols would be produced for occupation use. Keep in mind that the 1935S was basically non-existent until after German occupation, due to Moss being used by the French and Germans to produce other weapons. After the war, France would crank out 1935A pistols until 1950, and 1935S pistols until 1956. Mixed in with the 1935 pistols would be various pistols including the French-made MAB and unique R51, FN contracted 1922s, American Colt 1911s from the war, and even German pistols such as the P08 Luger, HSC, and especially the P38 Walther, put together while the French occupied the Mauser factory. Check out my Grey Ghost P38 video, link in the card above. Thanks to these and others that were in French Indo-China, France found itself trying to supply 12 different calibers of pistol ammunition to various theaters around the world. On October 30th, 1946, the French Army General Staff issued a directive for a new semi-auto handgun to bring about uniformity. There were 16 different requirements, which I'll place on the screen for you to pause and read if you're interested. An unnamed but understood requirement would be the caliber, 9mm parabellum. Finally, France was going to adopt a pistol that wasn't some whack-ass caliber. Instead of an open competition as with the 1935 pistols, the General Staff would designate the arms to be tested, and the Section Technique de l'Armée, hereon referred to as the STA, would do the testing. 2 pistols were from Moss, 1 from SACM, and 1 from SIG. The SACM pistol was a late entry, as they weren't even informed of the directive, but asked to participate anyway. Their entry was an enlarged 1935A. This pistol was the first to be eliminated due to accuracy problems and a malfunction rate of 6.5%. Remember that my High Point 1000 round video had a malfunction rate of 1.5 to 2%, and that got really annoying. The SIG pistol was basically a commercially purchased P210, and it's unclear whether SIG knew about this in the test. This pistol featured the Petter patents purchased from SACM in the late 1930s. The SIG performed well, with great accuracy and a malfunction rate of 0.48%. Although this performed the best, it was apparent that the General Staff really wanted the Moss entry, as it was thought that they were alerted to the directive beforehand. Their entry was basically a scaled-up 1935S to fire 9mm. Gone was the large locking lug in favor of a more Browning-like lockup with lugs on the barrel, locking into grooves milled into the slide. Moss presented 2 of these pistols, serial number 14 and 15, for testing. They fared poorly, as cracks would form in the breech blocks of both pistol and the 2,500 round endurance test. A third pistol with redesigned grips, as handling was also an issue to the General Staff, was produced. This pistol would have a 2% malfunction rate and again crack in the 2,500 round test. The final STA report was not favorable to either Moss or SACM, saying they both needed major and minor improvements. Still, the Moss pistol would be adopted as the regular sidearm of the French Army on August 16, 1950, as the automatic pistol 9mm model 1950. Pistols were ordered with STA's recommended changes, and further tests were run. One of the tests was a severe test of 8,500 rounds fired through each pistol. These pistols fared very well, with the only malfunctions being 2 pierced pistol primers. The STA issued a very favorable report on August 9, 1951, and recommended it for full adoption and issue. Alright, we're here at the gun cleaning table to look at the French Model 1950 9mm, as it says right there, Model 1950 caliber 9mm, and most Americans just call it a Mac 1950 because most of them over here say Mac on them. Now, a third of the pistols produced were made at Moss, and they would say Moss there, but I don't think there are very many Moss pistols that have made it to the United States. Now, the Mac pistols were made in blocks of 10,000 with a letter prefix, and a lot of the A, B, and C blocks did make it over to French Indo-China, which is why, of course, they ended up in the hands of the Vietnamese, and that's how a lot of these came back as bringbacks. Now, according to my source, Medlin and Huon, there was an ad in the, I believe it was June 1961 American Rifleman to sell these pistols, and those pistols that came here imported that way would say France on them, and that's a majority of the pistols in the United States probably came from that. Otherwise, it is Vietnamese Vietnam War bringbacks. So that kind of shows the outside of the pistol a little bit. I have a 1935S here that I've already field stripped just for kind of a comparison's sake, because the 1950 is basically a beefed up 1935S to handle 9mm. So let's take her down. First we got to release our magazine. Just like the 1935S, bring her back to the slide stop. Of course, you push it out on the other side. Pull that out. Pull your slide and everything off. Of course, you got your captive spring, which was a definite improvement over the 1911 when the 1935s came out. Of course, you got your barrel to come out and your slide. And like the 1935 pistols, you also have your hammer packet, which that likely borrowed from the Tokarov when they were designing the 1935s. Now, one of your big differences besides caliber and size, between the 1935S and the 1950 is you have 1935S. You just had kind of one groove machine there, and it went into a shoulder inside the slide. Well, this went back to a more Browning configuration, which you expect you do need it to lock up a lot better with the power of the 9mm versus the 32 French long. So basically, you have your notches milled into the chamber, and goes into the grooves milled into the slide. So that just hooks up really nice. And to get it back together, just put that back in your slide, put your captive spring back in. So that's ready to go. Of course, before you put that back on, you want to put your hammer packet back in, or else it definitely won't work. Now, this is a little bit awkward because I'm going to be trying to look at this through the camera when I put it back on. So let's... So we want to get everything matched up in there. Get her nice and matched up. Put that back in. Now bring her back to the slide stop. Push it all the way in. Release. And we got to do our function check. So everything's back together. Now, if so far in this video, if you have learned something or you like to see, please give me a like. Now, back to the video. Production would begin at Manufacture des Armes de Châteauroux, hereon known as MAC, and the first 100 pistols would be delivered on June 1st, 1953. MAC would follow the military custom of serializing them in blocks of 10,000 with a letter prefix, the first being A0001 and the final being serial number W1900 in June 1963. In all, 221,900 model 1950s would be produced at MAC. Starting in 1961, production would start to be shifted to Moss, who would make them in 100,000 blocks like they did with the 1873 and 1892 revolvers. The first 100,000 would have the prefix FG, while the last 20,000 would have FH. the final pistol being FH 20,000 rolling off the line on April 1978. Total production between the Mac and Moss pistols would be 341,900. The Model 1950 would become a regular standard issue for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Gendarmerie. While former French colonies would find some use for the pistol, no other nation would adopt the pistol. While a Beretta 92 copy, the G1, would solely be adopted starting in the late 80s, the Model 1950 saw frontline service in not only France's colonial wars, but both Gulf Wars and Afghanistan, and is likely still being issued. Those not issued are placed in reserve, placing it in 1911 territory for longevity. I'm lucky enough to own one of these to be able to experience shooting it. The extra grip to handle the 9-round single-stack magazine helps to mitigate recoil, almost putting this in mullet gun territory. The gun does present a big problem, though, to those with average to large-size hands: slide bite. This was actually a complaint by those who were issued the pistol, along with the grips being slippery when wet and the magazine release popping while you're unholstering the pistol. These problems would be solved with the new molded nylon grips made by Tausch, Tausch, which added somewhat of a beaver tail, had checkering to keep from slipping, and would encircle the mag release button to prevent the release while being unholstered. Mitigating the slide bite would make this an excellent shooting pistol for me. While I only put 100 rounds through mine, the 1950s are known for being very reliable. A couple things that would keep me from wanting it over contemporary pistols of the day. The safety mechanism makes it so there's no way to carry it cocked and locked. You have to carry it in condition 3 with an empty chamber, which was French doctrine. Okay, besides the slide bite, one other annoyance from a modern carry perspective is that there's really no good way to carry this cocked and locked. Now, I have a 1911 out, and I purposely brought a modern 1911 out because this is a gun that I have carried in the past, concealed carried, and I have no problems carrying it with one in the chamber, cocked, and locked, the safety up. All you got to do is flip the safety down and you're ready to fire. But French military doctrine still stated that you had to keep an empty chamber, so having a good way to carry with one in the chamber was not a real concern when this was designed, especially wasn't a concern when that one was designed. But basically, so you had one in the chamber, you'd unholster it, you're supposed to rack the slide, and you're ready to fire. Now, if you didn't expend all your ammo, or you didn't want to fire again, let's see if I can get a good light. Basically, you have that barrel turned over in there to protect your pin. So you did that, and you could reholster it, but to get it to ready to fire again, you'd have to flip that down, pull back your hammer, and fire. You have a single-stack 9mm magazine and a Browning mechanism. At the time, the capacity was good compared to contemporaries, but FN's high power existed. The Browning mechanism was surpassed by the Walther P38, which the French knew very well as they oversaw assembly of these during their occupation of the Mauser factory, and Tullio Marangoni was already turning that into his Beretta 1951. Still, this pistol has lasted in various forms of service for nearly 70 years, so hindsight and objections of a U2 military weapons historian wannabe should be taken with a grain of salt. Please join the GOA and get $5 off your membership with the link in the description. Please check out my other videos, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.